it sort of unfolds what nutritional psychiatry is about, because this is newer science. The gut-brain connection, the gut microbiome is newer science. It really only evolved in the last decade and a half. And what that also helped to do is bring forward this connection between the gut and the brain, because the gut-brain connection actually explains that food-mood connection.
What is it about food? Why is food such a powerful influence over our mental health?
I think it stems in part from our childhood. Food, think about when a baby is born. It goes back to those primitive drives and primitive needs. Baby is born, they cry, they breathe, and they eat. Right? Those are the three things that happen sometimes in the delivery room. And they're checkpoints the doctors will check. So it goes back to something very fundamental in who we are. And I think it also, over time in our childhood and as we grow up, there are many food memories that develop. And it may be associated with sometimes positive, sometimes not positive things. As a psychiatrist, I see both. I see kind of the spectrum of all of that. But food then becomes a powerful tool in how we negotiate our lives. Our current obesity epidemic, the things that COVID-19 is uncapped, have all brought that forward. But I think the thing that we're missing, Shawn, is that it's a very powerful tool for our mental health. And I think that that's what I'm hoping nutritional psychiatry will help people understand, that there's that connection we haven't made before as obviously. And if we understand it, the power is within our hands, at the end of our fork, and not only controlled by a prescription pad.
I love that you brought this up about the memory connection with food. I know that when there's certain smells, it takes me back to a specific moment, the olfactory senses and this connection. There's a lot going on there in the brain. And you even talk about this a lot in your book about the relationship with our food and specific cognitive and specific parts of the brain, like the hippocampus as well. Let's talk about that a little bit.
So, it's these food memories let's talk about the positive ones, will take you back in time, and they will bring back a positive memory, and they will hopefully help to guide you in a good way. And I think that what I'm trying to bring forward with nutrition and mental health is that sometimes those are not always the easiest memories. Sometimes people struggle around positive memories or have had more negative relationships with food, or maybe family, or maybe other relationships. How do we take that and make it healthier for them? Heal that relationship with food and then help them make healthier choices, because one of the things people are always talking about are comfort foods. And I've been known to say, comfort foods are discomfort for the brain, because I think you and I know that the things we tend to reach out for that we consider, or society considers to be comfort foods, are not great for the brain. They're often sugar-laden, or the wrong types of carbohydrates, or whatever it might be. And I think that becomes important for us to use as leverage to help our mental well-being.
Yeah. You actually have a chapter that's looking at the connection between PTSD and our nutrition.
Yes.
Which was one of my favorite sections. And in one subtitle, and this one was called Foods That Deepen Trauma.
Yeah.
You say that, quote, when you don't have trauma to deal with, you have enough brain capacity to take the time to make healthy choices. Yeah. But a brain that is under fire from fear and painful memories has an entirely different agenda. All it wants is a little break. Fast foods and soda can act as a form of self-soothing, providing comfort in an almost automatic reaction that is difficult to stop.
It becomes a cycle. It becomes a cycle of eating those foods, having less space to make better choices, and we get into the cycle of cravings that people will talk about. We know that sugar is associated with the dopamine reward pathways that street drugs are, like cocaine. So we know that when people speak about a strong term like sugar addiction, it actually has some scientific basis to it. So with PTSD, you're already struggling with an overload of things on your brain, and you have less capacity to make those healthier choices. So how do we walk ourselves back from that, and how do we break that path? Certainly therapy, certainly other forms of treatment become important, but food is also something we can deal with in that instance.
All right, now I'm gonna bring up something that might have got skipped over there. You mentioned cocaine.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
and this pathway being
Yeah.
very similar with sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a rational argument would come up is that like nobody's like selling their furniture to get sugar, or like
No.
selling their, I
True.
was selling their body or something.
True. Right.
But in reality, it's because sugar is so easily accessible and socially acceptable.
Yeah.
And there's a really famous study that was done on rats, giving them the option of choosing between sugar water or cocaine. And rats that were even addicted to cocaine soon shifted over their addiction to the sweetened beverage. It's so bananas.
It is not only crazy, it is in our food everywhere. And I think that this is something where we have to educate ourselves. The power of nutrition becomes, as you talk about, really important to us, because people don't realize there's an organization out of Boston that has listed upwards of 250 other names for sugar on food labels. So a couple of things about this. People don't realize that something simple like brown rice syrup is actually sugar, because brown rice is associated with a more complex carb. Maybe people are encouraged to eat that over other forms of rice. But people also don't realize from food labels that because our food labels are in grams and not ounces and pounds, which is how all our cookbooks are standardized in the United States, they don't know how to convert it. So 4 grams of sugar is 1 teaspoon. So if you start to convert that, you realize on a package, on a food that you're eating, the amount of sugar you're consuming. And sugar taps into that dopamine reward pathway. And that's, in fact, how we start to crave it more. Along with all the other stuff, Shawn, the artificial sweeteners and all the other things that, well, certainly the older ones that happen. So
yeah,
it's a trap.
That's so powerful. I think about this drink that I used to have when I thought I was doing really well, I was eating healthy, and I would get this green naked juice, and it had almost 60 grams of sugar in it.
Okay, there you go.
And I'm just like, because of that conversion process, mentally, we don't really understand what that looks like. So we're talking like 15 teaspoons of sugar in this marketed as healthy beverage,
Juice,
right? It's stripped down and it's naked. It's like, this is the power
Except
of marketing.
for the sugar.
Except for the sugar. It's hitting our bloodstream so quickly.
That's it.
Because it's in
fast.
this liquid form.
Exactly, because of that liquid form, it's different than eating a little cup of blueberries, and it's going to be metabolized, as you know, differently. And I think that I don't want to say it's trickery, but it is confusing for the public, because any recipe you look at, and whether it's a holiday recipe you're looking at, it's all pounds and ounces. So you don't think about it when you see grams, and you don't realize that 60 grams is actually a huge amount of sugar. So it's learning those little things that I think help empower us, especially with our mental health, but also our physical health, because we know that COVID has uncapped metabolic health as being a huge driver of disease. And we know that about 88% of Americans have at least one abnormal metabolic health factor. And we know that sugar impacts that. Sugar is one of the ingredients that impacts that. So our propensity towards diabetes or obesity or all of that are all enmeshed. We're all enmeshed. But so is mental health.
Yeah.
So.
Oh my goodness, this is so good. So I've talked about this several times. I don't think that the message can be stressed enough, and I'm grateful to have you here because we can expand on this message. But, of course, I was ringing the alarm about some of these things very early on, just paying attention to the data and, of course, just logical progression of, infectious diseases, for example, in a pre-inflamed body, if we're experiencing obesity or whatever the case might be. And the CDC, this was published in July, massive meta-analysis, 540 COVID patients, 540,000 COVID patients, 800 U.S. hospitals. The number one risk factor for death was obesity. And the second leading risk factor for death in this report was anxiety and fear-related disorders. And it's just as if that doesn't exist. It's as if no one is acknowledging that is a risk factor and how much our mental health has an influence over even our immune system.
Yes.
And this gets into the conversation that you talk about so eloquently in the book, what's happening in the gut and how that affects our not just our immune system, but also our mental health. And in this chapter, it's the gut-brain romance. So let's talk a little bit about that.
So that's one of my favorite chapters, besides chapter 11, which is recipes. But partly, Shawn, because it sort of unfolds what nutritional psychiatry is about. Because, this is newer science. The gut-brain connection, the gut microbiome is newer science. It really only evolved in the last decade and a half. But between about 2013 and 2017, there were probably about 12,000 articles published on the gut microbiome. And what that also helped to do is bring forward this connection between the gut and the brain, because the gut-brain connection actually explains that food-mood connection. So just like a romance, there are good days and bad days, no day is perfect. So is that relationship between the gut and brain. But when you understand how food interacts with that, and you understand that the gut and brain originate from the exact same cells in the human embryo, and then they divide up in life and form these two organs, you think, well, they wouldn't be connected, but they in fact are. Then they connected physiologically, biochemically, anatomically, by the vagus nerve, which is called the wandering nerve. That's the other nerve. It's the 10th cranial nerve. And this acts like a two-way superhighway. In Boston, we have the Mass Pike, and it's, never stops. So it's this two-way superhighway allowing for chemical signaling between these two organs all the time. And when food is broken down, think about it just very simply. As our digestion process happens on the day that you're kind of going through the fast food restaurants and getting those milkshakes and whatever it is, the breakdown products are more toxic to our body and especially to our gut. And the gut lining is a single cell layer thin and starts to build up an inflammation. But when you're eating a healthier meal, the breakdown products of the digestion of that food are more positive products, like short-chain fatty acids. So they are more positive for the gut environment and for your body. Just very simply, that unpacks it. And then you need to think about the fact that we know within a 24-hour period, those gut microbes, the 39 odd trillion that live in our gut microbiome, start to be impacted almost immediately by the foods that we eat. You may not feel it in your body, but they start to react and respond. So over time, if you are eating an unhealthy diet, let's say, it's going to lead to inflammation. And now inflammation is understood to be an underlying driver of those conditions like anxiety, fear, depression, PTSD, all of it. A lot of mental health conditions, including cognition. So we now understand that that form of chronic insidious inflammation in the gut can also impact that loop, that gut-brain sort of ecosystem, and be an underpinning of driving those conditions. And I've seen it clinically.
Wow, this is so powerful. I want to circle back and talk more about the vagus nerve, but I also want to highlight this point. I mentioned this paper a while ago. I was looking at the psychosomatic effects of COVID-19, and it was talking about this two-way street of the anxiety, fear-related conditions exacerbating inflammation, and inflammation exacerbating anxiety and related, kind of mental cognitive issues as well. And again, this data is pretty well known, but it's like putting it in the context of COVID-19, but it's as if, again, we know this already. We know how much, we know psychoneuroimmunology. We know how much our thoughts affect our immune system and our endocrine system, and the list goes on and on. And I want to see these things brought to the forefront because we're so much more powerful to affect change in our bodies than we've been led to believe. And I'm going to share this really quickly as well. This is one of the most startling papers that has come out in recent times. This was published in the journal Gut. Like the specific journal looking at gastroenterology and the like. And the title of the study is Gut Microbiota Composition Reflects Disease Severity and Dysfunctional Immune Responses in Patients with COVID-19. And the researchers uncovered that, and I want to ask you about this specifically. The researchers uncovered that hospitalized COVID-19 patients consistently had lower levels of immunomodulatory bacteria coinciding with higher levels of inflammation. So what do you think is going on here?
It's as you well know, it's a complicated system. But I think the more that we understand it's all connected, the more powerful we can figure out the interventions. So my understanding is really that, these chronic insidious ways in which, so when we look at COVID, let's look at COVID-19. We know that some of the underlying factors that were worse were things, pre-existing conditions like obesity. We know that those who survived COVID-19, those who've suffered with long hauler syndrome, also have new diagnoses of anxiety and depression that are much higher. So that's a different study. But when we take it back to this one, I feel as though that chronic inflammation that we're dealing with in our gut through how we're eating, if we're eating poorly, is also the gut is dealing with our immune system, our circadian rhythms, our sleep, our hormones, our vitamin production, immunity, managing our mental health. So it's dealing, I kind of think of it as Grand Central Station. It's kind of like becoming the center of many of these interactions. So when we look at just inflammation, if our gut is inflamed, it's going to affect our immunity because 70% of our immune system is in the gut. And herein lies, I think, some of how the science will unfold even further that the study showed. So, I think if we understand that connection and we think about one way to reduce the inflammation being stress management is certainly one of them, so we can't ignore that, but also how we eat to reduce inflammation, and think about that in terms of how we can then impact our gut health and then impact our mental health, but also immune health and other things.
Perfect. So again, they mentioned immunomodulatory bacteria. In your work, you talk about this throughout the book, this aspect of certain bacteria strains even having a direct impact on our mental health, like issues surrounding depression, for example. So let's talk a little bit about that, specifically looking at our gut bacteria, this plethora of, sentient things that are living in and on our bodies.
So one of the studies that I liked, because of course it involved food, was the fact that, they looked at the impact in depression of using probiotics versus Prozac in a particular study. And what was compelling was that they found by manipulation of the gut microbes in that study through the use of probiotics, they were actually able to overcome the impact, or when they compared it to the impact of Prozac, which tends to be highly prescribed in this country, that the probiotic came out on top. So it's a simple study, but I think what was powerful is it provided more solutions. It should be providing psychiatrists with the understanding that there are more solutions, not just the power of that prescription pad. Because I do think as a physician, our system, we're encouraged to write prescriptions. It's the way the system is set up. It's the way hospital visits are set up. But I think that we need to be thinking about more options, like how can we impact those gut microbes by simply how you're eating. Maybe it's a probiotic supplement, but you can also get those through fermented foods. So a study a pretty powerful study in a very highly reputable journal, Cell, which I know you know about, Shawn, from August of this year, from a group of researchers at Stanford, looked at, they found actually that fermented foods impacted inflammation in the gut. So, you can get these live active cultures from probiotic-rich foods, but you can also get them from fermented foods. So again, impacting that inflammation could improve your immunity over time, could improve your mood over time, could lower your anxiety. So the manipulation, and one of the things I'm most excited about is in the future, what I think the future in mental health should hold is the use of manipulating those gut microbes to improve mental health without the use of a prescription medication. So there'll always be a need for life-saving medications for someone who's actively suicidal, manic, has lost touch with reality, and is psychotic. So they're acute psychiatric conditions. It's not that food or nutrition can't be part of the solution, but that person may need more immediate help. But here's the power of the gut microbes. If we can learn to manipulate them through the use of psychobiotics in the future, to impact mental well-being, I think that would be a super powerful long-term outcome and goal in nutritional psychiatry.
Yeah, so powerful. This is one of the things I admire about you as well, is that, it's about equipping people, and even our healthcare practitioners who, again, we get into the field to help people with more tools, versus, it's generally going to be a first go-to is to try to treat a symptom. You mentioned Prozac. We have other SSRIs as well. Yeah. Let's talk about this connection with the gut, because we're talking about selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
Yes.
How does serotonin in the gut connect here?
Absolutely. So, it's interesting that these are some of the most highly prescribed medications. During COVID-19, in June of 2020, Zoloft went on shortage in the United States. The other name for Zoloft is sertraline. And this was shown through surveys to be because these were new prescriptions for anxiety, depression, and insomnia that occurred. So in my entire career, first time sertraline ever went on shortage. But these are powerful medications in the right situations where someone is actively suicidal and severely depressed. There's a need for them. However, they're not the only solution. But one of the things that we don't really think about or realize, but you would have thought about it if you've known a family member, a friend, or a physician who's prescribed an SSRI, because 90% of the actual serotonin is produced, as well as other neurotransmitters, produced in the gut, and more than 90% of the receptors are there. The connection to that prescription is that the first 7 to 10 days, someone actually has gastrointestinal side effects. Many people, it's one of the commonest side effects of these prescriptions. But, we haven't previously really made that connection. That is because the receptors are there, and that's where a lot of that action is happening. Of course, ultimately, the impact is on the brain, but that's important for us to know that there's the gut-brain connection, there's two-way signaling connection, plus this is where the receptors are located. So, I think it's just a powerful area that I want to see us delve deeper into the research on to find more solutions, because, part of my design in my clinic around using an integrated, holistic, and functional approach to psychiatry partly comes from my cultural background and kind of learning meditation and yoga from my grandparents, and then thinking when I went to medical school and I started to prescribe medications as a resident, why are we only pulling out a prescription pad? Why aren't we asking, if someone is coming into my office and is already, I can see, struggling with a little bit of a weight issue, and maybe depressed or even anxious, why aren't we thinking about more solutions? Like, why isn't that happening? And probably I've always been an outlier in that way, but I do think it's become an important part of the food is medicine movement in finding more solutions to mental health, because it's so stigmatized still. And if we can destigmatize that through the lens of food, I think that can be a powerful tool that will help people with their mental health, their metabolic health, all of which we know are now related, but also their physical health.
Yeah. It should seem obvious. I mean, the crazy thing is, and I've really thought more about this lately than I ever have in my life, is that the obvious is often the most difficult to understand, or the most difficult to analyze or question. Right. Because it's accepted as just kind of a cultural, this is how it is.
Right.
And for me, the obvious would be what we're putting into our gut, where all of this is taking place. This is literally the front line of serotonin activity of the receptors. Of course, what we put into this environment is going to deeply affect that connection. And, I think that, of course, we've got so many amazing tools today, and we're grateful for those things. But one of the things you really brought forward, and I never seen it articulated like this, is actually how ineffective our chronic treatment of depressive symptoms with these medications, how ineffective they actually are. Now, of course, there's situations, I think you said 25% of the time we get sustainable relief and solutions through medications, but overall about 50% of the time it's just not effective. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. So some research from around 2015 and then has been repeated in other studies has shown that there's a place for psychiatric medications, don't get me wrong, but it's not the only solution, because about 50% of people recover or feel significantly better. Another 50% still have symptoms. and they're still struggling. And I see this in my practice. I still prescribe medications, and I do see this in my practice on an ongoing way. And the problem also becomes, Shawn, is those individuals may have the side effects of the medication, but not the relief of the symptoms. So they might actually have the weight gain from selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They may have the loss of libido from those medications. Those are the two, probably the two things that people suffer with the most as side effects. Certainly I've seen that clinically. And when they don't get relief and they have side effects, you know, what happens to those individuals? What are we doing? Why, in a certain way, I think our medical system, and certainly as psychiatrists, I think we're failing those individuals because we need to find more solutions that they can feel better. Because they continue taking the medication, the only thing that continues is the side effects without the relief of symptoms. So I feel like, you know, we need to take a little bit of a step back and look at this more broadly and what the bigger picture is, and find more solutions for more humans.
Perfect. Yeah. I'm a big fan of effectiveness.
Yeah.
So if something's working, I'm a massive proponent.
Right.
But if it's not working, like, let's analyze it. But it just becomes an issue when it becomes, you know, the standard of care, you know. And I want to ask you about this. What is it about our conventional antidepressant medications that actually leads to weight gain being one of the primary side effects?
So, you know, some of it is the mechanism of how people will talk about this. They start to have this driver of their appetite, and they start to crave certain foods. And some of it is actually the mechanism of the medication. I mean, the risk-benefit ratio, which we go through with patients all the time, we hope, you know, we want to present them with the most positive picture, because they may be severely depressed and, of course, in need of that help. But as that happens, you may also have these cravings, or these, you know, you might want to eat more. You might notice that. And that's why that conversation I mentioned, Shawn, that I feel is missing at the get-go when we take out that prescription pad, or whether, you know, these days we do it electronically, but whatever format, that missing piece is also when you share that risk-benefit ratio with someone, sharing with them that there should be solutions to that. You know, the stuff that you talk about, and a proponent of just outstanding nutrition science, but also really outstanding physical health, like being aware, having that becomes important in the discussion, because explaining to them that you may actually have, not everyone, but many people do experience those side effects and those sort of cravings that develop because of the mechanism of the medication.
Wow, that's so fascinating. So we're talking about potential, so this is more of an increase of craving, of desire to eat. So we're looking at possibly something going on with the dopamine, because we're using an intervention that's targeting this one neurotransmitter slash hormone.
Yes.
What about the impact it's having on the rest of the system? That's all interconnected.
It's all interconnected. And that's actually how I often explain it to people, that we're giving you something that's going to impact your neurotransmitters, the chemicals, for want of a better word, your chemical signalings. Or, you know, sometimes people think about depression or being told it's sort of this imbalance of your chemicals in your brain. And that's obviously a simpler explanation, but you're absolutely right. We're not just impacting one thing, we're impacting a system. Just like when we eat food, you know, the food that gets digested is impacting all the bacteria down there in our gut, and actually the 5 other types of organisms down there, but the bacteria and 4 other types. But it's a similar thing with the medication. It's not just, you're impacting a system, you're impacting the entire brain. So there are going to be those side effects, and I think we need to manage them better by offering people more solutions.
Yeah.
You know?
I think I often think about this interconnection. I'll just sit and just kind of imagineer how my thyroid is interacting with the meniscus in my knee, for example. It seems so far-fetched until we think about it, because it seems like, oh, that's so far away. It's literally within the same system, the same human.
That's right.
They are inherently connected.
Okay.
And, you know, once we can really kind of start to grasp that, and just even simple examples of that, you know, and how our toes are affecting our consciousness or our awareness, right. You know, and like right now people think about their toes, where probably your attention wasn't there, but it's all intimately connected. And the nerves firing, they're on this super highway that's so beyond our understanding.
It's so true. I mean, we're probably only scratching the surface of this, right? And it's absolutely true, because one of the other things two things that I feel I should share with you, Shawn, that with the brain, like when we have conversations with our doctors, we talk about type 2 diabetes, we talk about hypertension, we talk about the weight gain, how do I lose this weight, what happened during COVID, but we don't talk about the brain. The brain arguably is the most important organ because it's driving all of those connections, right? The thought about your toe, when you look at your toe, when you feel your toe, all of that is mediated through the brain. And yet, we don't have that conversation. So that's one of my sort of pet peeves. And then my other pet peeve, I'll share both with you, is that in mental health, psychiatry is based, the way that we treat patients clinically is based on DSM-5. And there's a new one about to come out. But this diagnostic and statistical manual is checklists. We don't have a brain biopsy. We don't have an actual, if you have bronchitis or a pneumonia, we'll check a sputum culture, whatever it is, or blood test or what. And we don't have as many of those in psychiatry and mental health. So I feel like we just need more solutions, and we don't have them. And we should be acknowledging that, rather than, and I'm not saying that psychiatrists think this way, but I feel like we're not capturing everyone, because I find clinically with those checklists, someone with PTSD may be depressed, someone with ADHD may be super anxious. People fall between categories. They don't always fall as humans into one checklist category. And I think that is why we need more solutions, and certainly nutrition, exercise, movement, meditation, mindfulness, all of this, hydration, outdoor time in nature, all of this matters, to not only destigmatizing mental health, but improving our emotional well-being.
Yeah, these are at the core of human health. These are the things our DNA expect from us.
Yes.
And when these are removed, we're going to have the expression of symptoms that are demonstrating, it's giving
Disease.
us valuable feedback. Yeah. One of the people who wrote an endorsement for your book was Dr. Daniel Amen.
Yes.
He's a really good friend.
Yes.
And with that said, he's been somebody who's really been at the forefront of saying, hey, you know what? We're treating an organ we're not actually looking at and getting much feedback from. Right. Mm-hmm. And so let's, of course, if we can, let's get a peek at the brain. And as you're alluding to, what are some more things we can do to actually get some viable data rather than just going off this system, which again, the system is valuable, but it can't be the only tool.
That's right.
And this leads me to a point with you, and you're somebody truly, you are a pioneer who's created a space for treatment and for education for other physicians to utilize food. And my question for you is, when you first went to school, when you first went to medical school, why did this not exist? Why are you the person who's really pioneering, kind of creating this entity for food to be utilized? The title of your book is This Is Your Brain on Food. And it should seem very obvious again that every bite of food that we eat has an impact on every cell in our body. But what was your education like prior? Was this a big part of your education? Was food something you guys spent a lot of time on? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, so it wasn't a huge part of my education, but it was a part of my cultural heritage. So I grew up around my grandparents because my relationship with food goes back to my childhood. I spent a lot of time in the day with my grandparents because my mom is a double-boarded physician. So she was in medical school when I was born. And from them, I just learned yoga, meditation. My grandmother would pick fresh vegetables from the garden. I'd help her. I was too little to cook, but I would help her shell peas and do all sorts of things. But then they would sit and eat lunch with me. They would spend time with me. I learned so much from that, thinking back. And I think that came with me in my DNA. It was imprinted. But also there were other scientists in the family. So my mom's siblings, many of them were physicians, but there were a couple of Ayurvedic practitioners in the family who were uncles and aunts. And so there was that influence. And so I kind of came with all of this into medical school. And I realized in medical school I loved, human behavior, and I loved psychology, and I loved psychiatry. So I kind of, unlike my brother who's a surgeon, I wasn't headed in that direction. So I pursued that. But it was really a seminal moment as a young resident in psychiatry learning to prescribe medications when it came together for me. And I talked about this in my book, but you're kind of timid, you're learning everything. And this big burly patient, he was a construction worker in Boston, and our favorite coffee in Boston is Dunkin' Donuts. And he came in with this huge coffee, and I prescribed Prozac for him a few weeks prior. And he must have read the side effects, but he came in telling me that I caused him to gain weight, and he was upset with me. So here I am, this timid resident, learning and trying not to upset him, and and I was looking at his chart, and I realized it actually wasn't me, because I had the data in front of me around his weight. And I shared that with him, but then I saw the coffee, and I intuitively said, well, what did you put in your coffee today? So firstly, I did distract him. That was true. But when he told me that, I'd put this in, it was 20 ounces, right? So he had put in more than a quarter cup of processed creamer, because it was the one at the store, and 8 teaspoons of sugar. And when I was able to sit with him and calculate that, I'm not a huge calorie counter. I much believe in the quality of food. But here, I translated those things to him, and his eyes lit up. Because not only did he move from angry to appreciative, his eyes lit up because he also saw the power that he could make a difference. He was drinking and consuming empty calories. That to me was a very huge, that was the aha moment which put it together. If I can translate stuff that I grew up with, understanding, into information on which someone can make an action, right? People know a lot of stuff. They don't always take the action. Do we know we should eat healthy? We all do. Do we know this and that? We do, but we don't. It's hard to take that action step. And that for me was the powerful moment, because if I could then fill that gap in my education around nutrition and share that with someone, it was an additional thing separate to the prescription pad that didn't have to ignore therapy, which I very much believe in, the different forms of therapy, prescriptions which may or may not be needed, and then what else you're doing, And that to me drove it home.
That's such a powerful story, and I'm sure you have so many stories like this. And
that's my favorite, though.
Tying in this aspect with sugar, just to hammer this point home, in the book, you mentioned a 2018 cross-sectional research study of depressed college students, finding that about 30% of them ate fried foods, 50% drank sweetened drinks, and over 50% ate sugary foods upwards of every day.
Yeah.
And so having that connective tissue there of how is their diet possibly a major, at least a minor contributor to their mental health status. So let's hammer this point home here with sugar. What's going on in the brain when we're consuming this refined sweet stuff?
Absolutely. So one of the ways to think about it, and I also want to loop back to childhood obesity on that point afterwards, but basically when we consume, let's take a sugary donut. It's a simple carb. You eat it, hits your bloodstream. We know that it impacts our blood glucose levels and impacts our insulin. But one of the things that happens is that it allows for tryptophan to enter the brain and that's a precursor to serotonin, and it gets converted. And so when people say, I feel good when I eat a donut, Dr. Naidoo, it's true. For a few minutes after they eat that donut, they feel good. But guess what? I usually say, well, by the time you got to work, though, when you got off that train or you parked your car, weren't you hungry again? Because it's pretty much gone through your system and you're starving. You want either another donut or another food that you reach out for. That temporary feeling is a little bit of a trick, because we believe that we feel calm or we feel better when we eat that simple carb. The long-term effect on our brain is hugely problematic, because that insulin rush, the elevated blood glucose levels, all of that actually affects our brain cells. And so we need to understand that, comfort foods are discomfort for the brain because there is a long-term effect. It can affect our cognition. It is something that we need to have an awareness. We cannot avoid sugars entirely. That's not what I'm saying. But we can be more aware of those 8 teaspoons of sugar, the 60 grams of sugar in something, a sports drink that may have a ton of added sugar. And the more we understand that, the better options and better choices we can make. So part of it is that people do feel that initial good feeling, and they don't realize there's a long-term effect of sugar on the brain. That is problematic. And I'm just talking about the brain. It's also impacting the rest of your body. The inflammation in your gut, it's impacting every other system. But, that's the impact on the brain.
Yeah, so crazy. Obviously, through our evolution, sugar was incredibly valuable because the brain is running on glucose.
Yes.
And one of the most fascinating things that I noted, this was maybe 5 years ago, was just how quickly the brain will confiscate any glucose that you consume. It will gladly confiscate about half the glucose you bring in a given meal. And we have insulin activity in the brain as well. And we also have insulin resistance that can take place in the brain, which is one of the hallmark things we're seeing related to Alzheimer's, for example.
That's right.
And so we've got to understand that our exposure to sugar is incredibly abnormal. It's something we've never seen before in our history.
It absolutely. And, that's why they're calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes now. And it's that impact on sugar on cognition that I think if it's one thing we need to take home, and we all have sugar in our environment, so I am aware of it all the time myself. It's when we don't realize the amount of added sugars and even savory foods, ketchup, pasta sauces, salad dressings, separate to the preservatives and all of that, we then, it's like with my patient Bill, when you have awareness, you then realize you can change things, and that becomes a powerful tool. But the other thing, Shawn, about you spoke recently, did a really great piece on the impact of childhood obesity right now. And processed food sales during the pandemic have been precipitously high, and they haven't really gone down. And we know that weight has been an issue for more people or more Americans than not. But if you think about it, kids fall into this sort of group where a lot of processed snacks, a lot of sort of junk foods, a lot of things that are easy. Families were in quarantine. Parents were trying to cope with how do we manage all, school lunches no longer existed. So a lot of things happened. So this is not about blaming people, but how do we raise awareness? How do we reverse this? And same thing with the processed foods. A lot of it comes down to sugar and those processed ingredients. So
yeah,
it's all tied in. It's all tied in.
Yeah, it is. And this is something that really motivates me a lot. It was already a motivational force in my life.
Yes.
Because of just being a person, a child growing up in an environment that was so conducive to being unhealthy, at every turn. I didn't know that there was a difference.
Yeah.
About 80% of the people in my family were obese. It was just a commonality. The heart disease, the diabetes, the mental health issues, the drug abuse, the alcohol abuse. And so I have a really visceral connection to children who are in these situations who we're just kids. We're just trying to have fun, to play, to live our lives. And slowly we're being inundated with things that really start to degrade our expression of our genes, really.
Yes.
If we're talking
and your
about
development
epigenetics.
And development of your brain, because
that is huge.
Right. It's all happening at that time. And I completely agree with you. I think, children don't know the choices they should be making. They are products of their parents, but also their environment and everything around them. So it's tough to put on them that they need to make the choice unless you could talk a lot about meal prepping and helping people decide how to get meals out for the week. But involving kids in that is a very powerful thing, because they learn about whether it's shelling the peas or whatever it is. Inadvertently, you teaching them healthier eating habits versus a processed snack out of a bag. But orange doesn't have an expiration date, right? So it's not a whole food. If it has an if it has an expiration date, it's not a whole food. It's just simple things to help them understand that it's like eat the whole orange, skip the store-bought orange juice. Teaching a kid that becomes some basic things you could impart. So
yeah, it's so powerful, and the data exists. It's just for us to bring attention to it and also to bring solutions. You know, the study that you're mentioning was reported by the CDC, looking at annual weight gain of our children during this pandemic.
Yes.
And one cohort, so these were kids who were moderately obese, their annual rate of weight gain essentially doubled over this short period. And we can be like, okay, well, this is a short-term thing, you know, but it's continuing on, number one. And number two, if we get into the understanding of recidivism, and once we start to set this template as a child, it becomes exponentially more difficult to address these metabolic issues as we get older. And so this is so important. And, you know, again, we're talking about solutions today, but another absolutely massive issue specifically affecting our children right now is ADHD. And so if you could, can you share just how long you've been in this field, and could you share what you've seen over the span of your career with rates of ADHD? Has this been going up from what you've been seeing firsthand?
It actually has. So I've been in this, I've been a psychiatrist for just over 2 decades now. And I will tell you that prescriptions in both children and adults are precipitously higher for ADHD. I would say in the last decade or so that I've noticed. Early on in my career, yes, it was important. Yes, it existed. But now I'm finding that more adults are coming in with problems, but also children. But it's just sort of, I feel like it's everywhere. And I know that's a gross exaggeration, but I feel like that's what's going on in the clinical world. And I am a nutritional psychiatrist, so I probably take everything back to food. But the truth is, our food system has changed. You know, what we're eating has changed. You know, eating a diet of Pop-Tarts and cereal is going to impact your brain development. So we have to make that connection that food is impacting the brain development of children. And I can't ignore that fact when prescription rates are going up for things like ADHD. So I feel like taking a step back from that and rethinking what we're doing from early on is going to affect the brain development of children. Of course, there are genetic, environmental factors, so many different things. Not every child has the same access to food, you know, or same access to food or same access to healthy food. So all of that becomes important, but you know, I think our messaging has to be different in terms of our own understanding, because I think that that's where the power lies. Food labels are not necessarily going to change, Shawn. You know, no one else is from the outside is going to tell us, but I think we need to empower ourselves to help our own families, help our kids, help our generations that are after us or before us.
Yeah, so we can do it.
Yeah.
Let's dive in and talk about some specifics here with this one. What are some of the specific foods that can trigger or contribute to symptoms of ADHD?
Sure. So, you know, one of the things to think about with ADHD is those processed, ultra-processed foods, the colorants, stabilizers, all of those things. The ultra-processed ingredients in those foods are just not good for brain development. So that's a big one, because I think that, you know, it excludes a lot of sort of school-age snacks and things like that. Then, you know, you have, you want to think about the studies that looked at what can you do to sort of improve symptoms of ADHD. And something I found interesting, because it's also related to the medication, is eating breakfast actually helps kids focus better. So a study developed a breakfast bar, and they looked at giving the children the breakfast bar every single morning as a sort of a stable breakfast. And they found that their attention was sustained better during the day. And this becomes important clinically, because medications for ADHD suppress appetite. So often a person who takes that medication in the morning does not feel hungry. And it becomes important to train them and teach them and coach them to make sure they have breakfast, because it's ultimately going to affect their focus. So it's just, you know, it's just a way to think about it as well.
Yeah, that's profound. Yeah, I remember one study, it's been a couple of years now, but essentially they found that there was some growth patterns being stunted from some ADHD medication.
Yes.
And, you know, what we tend to do with our hyper focus on medication is just like, let's try and improve this medication somehow, instead of like, let's address the underlying cause here of what's happening with the brain. I know that for me, as soon as you mentioned the breakfast, when I was in high school, most of the days I would eat like these mini muffins, or I would eat donuts. I would eat, of
Sounds like
course,
my medical school diet.
yeah, this sugary
Yeah.
cereal. And I still managed to, I was a scholar athlete,
Yeah.
student advisory, all these things.
Yeah.
But I just imagine, like, what could I have accomplished with a healthy brain, with balanced blood sugar, and my metabolism was healthy.
Right.
At the time, of course, like I had there's autoimmune components to this, of course, but seasonal allergies and asthma and all of these things that they don't exist in my reality anymore. But
Right.
and I just look at like the things that were holding me back as I'm at track practice or on the football field,
Yeah.
and largely related to what I was eating.
Absolutely. Also, the gut microbes would have been involved, right? And we may or may not have known that at the
Right.
time. But I think what you're saying is also super powerful from the perspective of the fact that we now know the brain can change. So, what I think is powerful for us to understand, if you're listening to this, is that if you're at that age or at a different stage of life, you can actually impact your mental health through how you're eating. And here's what I mean. For example, think about Alzheimer's and cognitive disorders. As psychiatrists, as neurologists, or whoever it is that's diagnosing it, we're catching it too late because people come to us with symptoms and then we're pulling out our prescription pad for medications that they're not curing the disease, they're helping with symptoms. But if we, this is something I've been thinking a lot about recently, if we turn that on its head and we really reverse engineer this, we should at all ages of life be thinking about how we're eating, because that inflammation driving process is causing neuroinflammation in the brain. One of the things, and Dr. Rudy Tanzi, a colleague of mine at Mass General, who's a huge Alzheimer's researcher, talks about this all the time. Food and our nutrition can impact that significantly. It's the one thing we can reverse. We cannot change. A lot of us can be walking around with mild changes of even Alzheimer's without it being symptomatic, but something may not happen. The thing that we can change is how we're eating, because any neuroinflammation that's been set up can be reversed through changing our diet. So it becomes super powerful for us to know. So yes, you had that diet as a teenager, and I'm sure your performance could have been different, but you've been able to, through your own adjustments, really improve your brain, and I think we can all do it.
Yeah, we have so much potential, and I think one of the big takeaways from today that I want everybody to really get is, again, this is it seems very obvious, but the obvious can also be the most difficult to understand.
Yeah.
Your brain cells are literally made from the food that you eat. It's made from the food that you eat, and you get to choose what materials you're giving your brain. And one of the things you mentioned several times throughout the book, for example, are these wonderful and critically important essential fatty acids, omega-3s. And they're used for signal transduction, for the structural integrity of the brain itself. Let's talk about this, because I know this is going to be important in solutions for ADHD and also for just cognitive performance overall.
Absolutely.
Brain fog, things like that.
Absolutely. So omega-3 fatty acids, hugely important in many different mental health conditions, including ADHD, including cognitive disorders, but also depression and anxiety. And we get them from things like wild sockeye salmon, fatty fish, sardines, anchovies, but you also get plant-based sources. You do get the short-chain ALAs in plant-based sources, so there is a little bit of an issue around availability and the conversion, because it's not as efficient as the omega-3 fatty acids in things like in fatty fish. But you can get sources in walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, sea vegetables. And so we know that they exist there, and we know that they are important. So consuming them becomes important. A lot of people say, well, can I take a supplement? You can't out-supplement a healthy diet. So start with food first. And then if you're talking to your doctor and you need that supplement, absolutely. But these are powerful tools in sort of the armor that we need for our mental well-being. And so, I would say if you eat fish, eat those. And if you're plant-based, then look at those vegan sources. But also maybe taking an algal oil supplement may be a way to go if you're plant-based, because it could make up for that, trying to deal with the conversion of the short chain to the long chain omega-3s.
Yes, that's a tweetable. You can't out supplement an unhealthy diet. That's powerful. That's powerful. And I love that you gave these different recommendations. So we've got ALA, the plant source.
Yes.
What we're really looking for the brain is DHA and EPA.
And EPA, which you get from the seafood sources, and really fatty seafood is the biggest source. But I'm trying to think I know that there's an interaction with turmeric, and so for example, the reason when I make a chia pudding, because the chia seeds have the short chain omega-3s, they also have fiber and protein, which is great for you. But I often add turmeric with a pinch of black pepper to my chia pudding because it helps that conversion. So that's just one of my little hacks that I came across. And so my chia pudding is a little yellow, but and then the piperine from the black pepper, that's a different interaction, but that activates the curcumin in the turmeric and makes it 20 times more bioavailable to your brain and your body. So
perfect.
2 little hacks there to
I love
improve
this.
your breakfast.
See, I've been talking about this for over a decade, like these biopotentiators. Food is so cool. This is what you get from food that you can't get from an isolated nutrient. There's so many cofactors that make the magic happen.
It's true.
That's so remarkable. So we mentioned food first for our omega-3s. We've got fatty fish. Somebody else who wrote an endorsement for your book, Dr. Lisa Mosconi.
Yes.
Another person that, probably the first big podcast to, help get her out to the world. I love her. She's amazing.
She is wonderful.
But she's the person who shared with me about caviar and salmon roe having like 3 times more omega-3 fatty acids than the fish itself. And I was just like, I was kind of taken aback because it's just like caviar, because all I knew about was from television, from Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. But there's so much there. But from that, taking another step down, most of the studies on DHA and EPA are coming from fish oil. But there is krill oil now. It's really popular. But also you mentioned if folks can look to an algae oil at least if you're doing a fully vegan protocol. The EPA and DHA is so important. Can't stress it enough.
Exactly. And, eat what you feel is important to you, but there are always ways to make up for those nutrients somehow. And that is actually a place, Shawn, where, supplementation may be important. I always feel food first, but another one is saffron. So saffron, there's significant number of studies with the spice saffron. One of my favorite things is spices. And helping depression. But the quantity used in the studies is not a culinary use. So we might use a few threads in a dish that you make, and it wouldn't be enough to impact your mood. So that's a place where you may want to speak to your doctor about a saffron supplement, because it actually could help your mood.
So saffron, supplemental form with that. And what are the benefits?
It improves mood. So significant number of studies that showed 2 things actually. Turmeric and saffron have several positive trials that improve mood. And then my hack with turmeric is always add that pinch of black pepper because of the bioavailability. But saffron, people can't really eat enough of it. So enjoy saffron as a spice that you use. But if you really feel you need the benefit for your mood, then speak to your doctor about a supplement.
Perfect. So I know over the years, of course, you've seen a lot of folks with various sleep-related issues. And, this is at epidemic proportions in our culture today now, too. So you talk about this in the book, some solutions. And first of all, let's talk about how maybe certain foods can be contributing to issues around insomnia, poor sleep quality. And then let's talk about some foods we can look to improve our sleep quality.
Absolutely. During the pandemic, people are calling this coronasomnia. Because so many are really struggling with sleep, and we know that prescription medications for sleep have risen as well. So it's definitely a big issue. But the first and foremost with sleep, we talk about sleep hygiene, and it's one of those things that people may know about, but we don't always practice it. So simple things, there are very many good benefits of caffeine, but you want to drink it early in the day if you do drink it. with caffeine as with alcohol, another substance that can affect your sleep. It's often what you add to it as well. So think about that when it comes to caffeine and alcohol. Caffeine early in the day, if you drink it, a couple of cups of coffee, in fact 400 milligrams or less, was shown in terms of anxiety to be something that a person could tolerate. Unless you feel jittery when you drink coffee, then it's not for you. With alcohol, if you're leaning on that glass of wine to put you to sleep, it's actually impacting your sleep architecture. If you're just having it with dinner and you're sleeping okay, no worries there. But if you having that because, as people have struggled during the pandemic to go to sleep, then it has a rebound effect on your sleep architecture. Then it's things like, shopping at night in bright lights. That's an element of sleep hygiene. Shutting off your devices at a certain point, kind of calming your system down, getting it ready for sleep. Those are all things that actually negatively impact your sleep. So think about sort of cleaning up some of those habits first, and then think about the foods. One of my favorite things to do or suggest to people is to have breakfast for dinner, because eggs actually contain a natural source of melatonin. And so get some good pastured eggs and add some veggies in, like asparagus and a few other things, and have that melatonin rich meal at dinner. There's also tart cherries. So there are tart cherry juices on the market, but just watch out for the added sugars in those. But tart cherries actually have a good amount of evidence that helps sleep. And I know not a lot of natural markets in California, I've heard from my patients, actually have tart cherry juice. So people use a little bit of that, and that helps them sleep as well. That's if they can't get the actual tart cherries, which are also available, certainly not where I live, but some parts of the country.
So cool. That's one of those, again, rare food sources that have melatonin in there as well, so that's really interesting. And you also talk about something that's traditional chamomile tea, for example, like having that before bed.
Simple things. These are things, again, Shawn, like you had mentioned, simple things that we often overlook as solutions. Chamomile tea, extremely calming for the system. Passion flower, lavender, a lot of those actually really reduce that sort of activity that's going on in our brain, and almost gives us signal to the body and the brain that we're getting ready for rest. All of that becomes important. Another thing is sort of eating dinner earlier than later, because it allows for your food to digest, and your body is calming down again, getting the message that you're getting ready to rest and sleep.
All right, I cannot let you go without talking about libido.
Yes.
All right, so you mentioned that, again, one of the common side effects of conventional medications can be low libido.
Yeah.
But there's a plethora of information now on how our nutrition affects our libido, both negatively and in more positive, affirmative ways.
Right. So
let's talk about how our food can be affecting our vavoom. I don't know.
So it turns out there are these foods like pistachio nuts, apples, avocados that actually, and then foods that are rich in oxytocin, which is, the hugging hormone, that can actually help us along. So, and dark chocolate. So, these are foods that people like. And, dark chocolate, extra dark natural chocolate is rich in serotonin, magnesium, prebiotic fiber. It's actually great. It's usually the sugary candy bars where we go wrong. But the extra dark natural chocolate is great, and it's rich in oxytocin. So adding in those foods, I have recipes in the book, but I also kind of give you ideas of how to incorporate them into a menu. Starting to add those in. Remember, it's not a quick fix. It's not an overnight thing, but, think about adding those foods in a natural, consistent way to your diet. And, they could positively impact your libido and how you're feeling. And there are a lot more foods in the book,
So I had a good one, how foods affect your freakiness. All right. So what can be on the other end creating issues? Because again, this is something I know you've seen has been steadily climbing in recent years of low sex drive, erectile dysfunction, impotency, the list goes on and on. So let's talk about that. What are some of the things that could be contributing to that?
Right. So, you know, people won't be surprised by these, but again, the more nuances, and also we are now understanding that these foods just becoming so pervasive in our culture are impacting our metabolic health, and thereby impacting things like erectile dysfunction and other things. So it's sort of a cycle. It's not just fixing one thing and ignoring another. So if we take it down to that level, then we want to think about the ultra processed foods, basically something that has an expiration date. Look at the ingredients, see what you're eating, because the food stabilizers, the colorants, the dyes, those are not good for us. The trans fats, not good for us. The artificial sweeteners, for the most part, not good for us. These are all disruptive to the gut microbiome. And remembering that it's an ecosystem with the rest of our body. And there's several others. But, you know, those are some good places to start cleaning up our diets. The added and refined sugars, of course, which we've mentioned a few times now.
Yeah. And again, just logically, this can gum up circulation.
Yes.
You know,
exactly.
And so for the brain, also, I don't think we often make this connection, but so much to do with our sexual function, with our arousal, has to do with our brain. Our brain is really our largest sexual organ,
That's people don't
contrary to
realize
popular belief.
That's right. People don't realize it. Exactly. It's all connected. And thinking about how you're eating, realizing it's not going to be, you know, like the famous blue pill that people talk about. It's not that quick fix to something, but you can clean up different things in your diet. You can incorporate these foods into a date night. You can, you know, really start to think about it and feel like there are more solutions in your toolbox.
Perfect. So we got pistachios on the list here. We've got
apples, avocados,
chili peppers,
spicy. Yeah, spices.
Okay, avocados are on your list as well.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah,
and they're rich in healthy fats, protein, and fibers. So all good.
Perfect. Well, this has been fascinating, and you know, there's so much more in the book, and you cover, you know, you talk about bipolar disorder. You talk about obviously these epidemics of ADHD and OCD, and you're addressing so many of these things with nutrition-based solutions. And also, again, just helping to put the complete picture together for folks and really empower things. And I love when I asked you about sleep and improving sleep related to diet, you first talked about our lifestyle, right? And having good sleep hygiene in the first place. Because even trying to treat things with nutrition, your nutrition's not going to matter if you're staying up to 3 a.m., you know, binge watching, I don't know.
Eating popcorn.
Yeah, eating popcorn and watching, I don't know, what are people watching now?
Whatever the hottest thing on Netflix is, or whatever it is. But it's absolutely true, you know, and thank you for saying that, because people come in and they can't sleep and they're looking to get a prescription. And in a way, it's not their fault, because our system is engineered that way. Go to see a doctor, get a prescription. I think that, you know, we have to take a step back in those situations that are not acute, where someone's life is not in danger, and think about, you know, are you shopping at such and such a store late at night? Are you buying your groceries at 10 p.m. at night? You know, do you have your phone at your bedside with your notifications buzzing all the time? These are, you know, these are all important things in our lifestyle.
Right, and they're all relatively new.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And what I was gonna say earlier, I couldn't remember the name of the show. It's The Witcher. It just came out, and I was thinking about it in the context. He has this little vial of some kind of beverage that he drinks, and it unlocks some kind of weird power. It's Henry Cavill, who played Superman, plays this character. Anyway, so that just came out. And so whatever we're binge watching, you know, we got to understand that if we're doing this into the evening and we're wondering why our sleep quality is poor, not to say you can't watch a show or what the case may be.
Yeah, or eat popcorn. Yeah.
Let's have, you know, maybe a little bit of a screen curfew.
Yeah.
Let's have a evening routine where we have some chamomile tea and just kind of settle down. Yeah. And, you know, make sure that we're practicing this good hygiene. As you mentioned, having breakfast for dinner with the eggs. That was such a great tip as well. So many great tips and insights in the book. Can you let folks know where they can get the book and also where they can just follow you and get more information?
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Shawn. So my website is umanaidoomd.com. I'm on social media and all the channels at DRUMANAIDOO. I'm releasing my first virtual course in nutritional psychiatry in January to share more on the work. And thank you so much for hosting me. It was really a pleasure to talk with you.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to optimize your mindset and to achieve your goals faster.
All psychotropics are anesthetics. They're versions of anesthetics, so they basically numb the brain. Part of the reason why people are dying 18 to 25 years younger is not helping people manage mind, just stuffing down the symptoms with a drug.